Michael Gervais, welcome to the Mindset Advantage podcast. I'm so glad to say those words finally. This has been in the works for a long time. Welcome to the show.
Oh, congratulations on creating the show, and definitely thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to the conversation. We have so many things we want to get into, but first, I think it's important. I really want to set the table for the listeners. Your company is Finding Mastery. The podcast is Finding Mastery. I'm just so curious, Mike, if we could first start with what does it mean to find mastery? What is mastery? What isn't it? Can we talk about that? It's something we haven't talked about in this podcast yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. It's multidimensional. Like, this is not a one answer, go at what mastery is, but I will give you my best. I've been studying mastery for, I'd say deeply for the last 10 years, but over the last 25 years as a licensed sport and performance psychologist, it's definitely ingrained in our training. So mastery for me, to oversimplify it, there's two main components. There's mastery of self and mastery of craft. And mastery is not about winning. It is not about an outcome. It is about a process of becoming your very best, or in some respects, and I'll use this word loosely, perfecting the art of expressing your craft. And so mastery of self is where I tend to spend most of my time, but I use the environment of mastery of craft, meaning arts, business, and sport, as an example for, I'm sorry, not an example, but a working laboratory for how the best in the world are actually organizing the best practices towards mastery of self. And then one level deeper is that there's a phrase that you've often heard, and many of us have heard, is that game recognizes game. So there's something about mastery that people that understand that language and they're living that process of becoming their very best, or working on becoming their very best in a craft, is that they recognize when somebody else has it. So there's an attunement to what mastery looks and feels like. And then if we click underneath that, so that's kind of like there is a shared language. There's the ability to see and feel what mastery is. It is, for me, it is about getting right to the edge of one's capabilities and being able to still have command of oneself or the technical skills of the craft, even right when you're at the edge. So people that are masterful, either of self or craft, are able to look elegant. They're able to dance at the edge. They're able to make the complicated look simple, and at the same time unlock new levels for themselves. And so it's a rare air, it's rare space. It is something that is available to us all, though, is to get on that path towards understanding what it means to develop one's best. And those that are able to master themselves, or mastery of self, what that really means is that they're able to meet the demands of a moment. So they can meet the moment, if you will. And that takes time. That takes investment in psychological skills. And that's what I've dedicated the last 25 years of my life towards.
Man, that's so well said. When I think of somebody who is a master, Mike, you said it's a lot of time. And I think I'm trying to think of the mistakes people make, Mike. And I'm thinking the mistake is that the mastery comes very quickly. Talk to me about the time it takes to become a true master at something. What does that look like? And what are the mistakes that people make?
No, it's decades. Like, mastery is I'm more interested in the process than I am the outcome of it, but it takes time. And if you think about mastery and you think about high performance and then you think about performance, and then underneath of that, you think about um, micro choking, and then you think about underneath of that, like full on choking. Um, so there's an arc when you think about the expression of craft or the expression of self. Oftentimes that people don't invest in their psychological skills, they'll find that they can perform, or they can thrive or survive under pressure, one of those two. But most of the time, people, if they don't invest in their psychology, they experience micro choking, which is that they know they have more to give, to say, to express, but they choke off access to those unlocks, to that creative expression, because their mind is saying, no, 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 you've got to survive here. Forget about being artistic. Forget about getting to the truth of it. Just get through it. And it takes time to get to that place. And time under tension is what we're talking about. It's not just time, it's time under tension, which is time under psychological stress or emotional stress. Then that's the time that really counts. And just like we're building any physical or technical skill, we start in calm environments and then we progressively work up into more intense environments. The same is how you train your mind. You start by sitting on a pillow, meditating, or mental imagery, or being clear about how you speak to yourself to back yourself. And you do that in a calm environment. Breathing also holds up in this environment or in this condition. And then you progressively use those skills in more rugged or more hostile or more stressful environments. And that's when you know you're onto something, is when you can do it both in calm and in high stress environments.
I love what you said
And
about
again, that just takes time.
totally. I love what you said about investing in your psychology. I mean, you're speaking to the choir with Craig and I here, but for athletes out there, investing in your psychology. I like to ask a lot of the times for athletes, how much of the time or how much of your sport is mental? And usually they say, 75 to 85%. And then we ask the rebuttal. Are you spending that much time on your mental game? The answer is usually no. And I'm curious, Mike, for somebody that is looking to invest in their ears perk up, I want to invest in my psychology. You talk a lot about creating a philosophy and that being the number one space, the kind of a starting spot for kids or athletes to what is your philosophy? What do you stand for? Can you dive deeper into some of that? What does that look like if we're talking about investing in your psychology? Is that the best place to start, Mike?
It is a important place to start. So there's 5 main principles, and so that I work from, and we wrote all about this. It's well documented online, but those 5 principles are self-discovery, which is right at the center of the whole thing. And this is called, this is the Finding Mastery 5, 5, oh gosh, 5 pillar framework. Okay, so self-discovery, and then there's a whole set of psychological skills that we can build. There's a psychological framework that we can build, and you can double click on all these wherever you want to go. There's a set of recovery practices, and then mindfulness is the golden thread, the 5th that intertwines through all of the other 4. And so self-discovery, part of self-discovery is knowing your personal philosophy. Knowing your first principles is essentially what a philosophy is. And we all have first principles. We all, actually, all of us, kids and adults, we have a philosophy that we're already working from. It's informed the watch you bought or didn't buy, the car that you bought or didn't buy, the house, all of your choices are informed by your philosophy. But what we found is that if people don't have clarity of their philosophy, they can get whipped around. And they get whipped around by what other people think of them or what the said conditions or cultural values are rather than their own personal values. And so first principles are a fancy way of talking about the things that matter most to you. And if you think about the greats amongst the greats, Dr. King, you think about Gandhi, you think about Jesus or Buddha or Mother Teresa, whoever comes to your consciousness about the greats of the greats, is that they had a very clear philosophy. Their first principles in life were well articulated. So with that clarity, they were able to live with great conviction, and some of them died for it. And so what happens in between clarity to conviction, that's where we use mental skills. That's why we want to invest in our psychology, so we can be about it. What is it? Our first principles. So the work definitely starts with thinking deeply, meditating on, writing, or talking through my first principles. What are they? And for kids, that's big work. That almost is too big. So they tend to adopt their parents or their spiritual affiliation or the neighborhood, first principles, or the nation's first principles, whatever they ascribe to. But as you move through adolescence into early adulthood, and certainly once you've lived on the planet for more than 3 decades, like you got to do that work. Otherwise, you get whipped around. And so, first principles is no more complicated than write it down. Like, what are the principles that guide my thoughts, words, and actions? And you just write that stuff down. And at first, you might have 3 pages of first principles, and then you got to whittle that thing down to what we would call a personal philosophy is basically a sentence or two that is under 25 words. Hopefully it's under 15 words that you can live by and be attuned to. And if you think about the greats of the greats, like the Dalai, or not the Dalai Lama, but Buddha, or certainly Dalai Lama would be one of them, but Buddha is a little easier for me to think about right now, or Jesus, or Gandhi. You and I probably could go, oh, yeah, okay, maybe Jesus's first philosophy is, what would you say it is?
Love.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, isn't it? Like that. Like first principles can be very, very simple. And then, but being about it, so once you have that clarity, being about it is a bit harder to do. And again, that's why we want to train mental skills so that we can be about it. So I'll stop there. I think it's a great place to start. There's a set of best practices that will help you get there, and we've invested in those best practices. But not to get into the weeds, it just takes some good intellect and somebody to bounce those ideas off of, to tune them, or to know internally, like, yep, that is it. I don't care what anyone else has to say about it. This is true for me. And so for me, I'm an extroverted thinker, so it helps me to work it out with other people as well.
I think it's important what you're saying. Get whipped around as someone who works a lot with high school athletes and kids who want to be leaders, team captains. One of the questions I asked in my workshop is, what holds you back from being a better leader? And top 5 is always, I'm concerned about what other people think. And so as a younger person is trying to develop their philosophy, I mean, how do they do that? Because in a young person's world, things can change on a dime. Everything's going great, then they mess up a little bit, and then the next day they walk into school and everything's different. So what recommendations do you have for a young person to kind of create their philosophy?
Well, first, I would just celebrate the idea that they're aware that what holds them back is the opinions of others. And I obviously want to talk about that research I've done there. So, but to get to the concrete answer of how to help them with their philosophy is that I think the first pass is to think through who are the people and the ideas that inspire them. So if you think about, if you just help them write down a list of the people that inspire them, it starts to generate, a question, what is it about that person? So if they put a musician, or they put an artist down, or they put a business leader or a family member, and then it's a dash, what characteristics, what qualities, what values did they stand for in your mind? And then it starts to get the juices rolling about what are the most important values or principles that are already paying out or playing out in their life. So that's where I would start with them.
And so let's dive deep into some of that research. So the new book is coming out today. The First Rule of Mastery: Stop worrying about what other people think of you. You coined the term F.O.P.O. I think it's so great. Fear of other people's opinions. And we were talking before the show, Mike, that it's people. There's a lot of different categories of people. There's people in the stands. There's people on the other team. And then sometimes we don't think about this, but sometimes that person can be your coach as well. So I'd love to kind of talk about all those different types of people and some of the research you came across. I'm so excited to get your book. I have it pre-ordered. And so let's dive into some of the research.
Okay, thank you. And so F.O.P.O, fear of people's opinions, is a condition. And I want to talk about that condition. At the same time, there's this really large opportunity. Once you're aware, we think that F.O.P.O is the greatest constrictor of one's potential. And I'll explain that as well. But there's this really beautiful moment. Once you're aware of it, then you can say, what am I going to do with it? And this is not a question about whether I should stop thinking about other people, but this is a question about how to stop worrying. And so other people's opinions do hold value, but it's the worrying of their opinions that becomes a culprit to our own potential. So in shorthand, F.O.P.O is this exhaustive attempt to try to interpret what others are thinking in an effort to avoid negative evaluation by them. So it's not the actual negative opinion that's so problematic. It's the fear of that opinion. When we attempt to preempt a negative opinion by persistently interpreting clues in our environment, that's where we get into trouble. And so when we are obsessive about visually reading body language or micro expressions, or trying to interpret the words or silence that somebody has, or the actions or inactions that they take, that trying to figure all that out in an attempt to not be rejected and or to be accepted, what that does is it just burns our internal resources. We get whipped around by trying to find favor in others as opposed to being about it. And it that we're referring to again are those first principles. So that's kind of what it is. And once you recognize that you might be challenged with FOPO, that, and again, at some level we all are. We live in this performance-based world where we value how well we're performing, and that's born out of this this need to be successful in a factory, and then this need to be successful on social media. Like that arc of 200 years has been important in people's psychology, but people's brains, the million-year-old massive machine that sits in our skull that's only just a few pounds of tissue, is the most complicated system that we understand as humans. That system is trying to keep you alive. Your brain's primary function is to keep you alive, and that means it has to scan the world for danger. And one of the most dangerous things in modern times is not the saber-toothed tiger. It's actually not the dark alley, although those can be dangerous from time to time. It is other people's opinions. Because if we fell victim to people ostracizing us, whether that was by our own accord, meaning that our behaviors were unbecoming, our ability to perform, meaning to contribute to the whole of the tribe, was causing problems with success of the tribe, that we were kicked out. So, and if we're kicked out, that meant disaster. That meant survival was at risk. So we are highly tuned to making sure that we are part of the tribe. And that is still holding true today. So until we face that biological brain processing with modern day problems, which our brain is not sorted for modern day problems. Modern day problems are like, more luxurious for many people. And I say that with all sympathy, and that's not the right word, for all compassion for people, as many people in the United States that we have, there's equal amount of people in India that don't have gas or running water. So I'm talking about not survival in that respect, but I'm talking about survival of once basic needs are met, that one of the great challenges we have is to feel like we fit in, to feel like we're not being rejected. And that's where F.O.P.O, once you understand it, you can work with it to find some freedom.
What's cool about this topic is that, you work with the best athletes in the world, Mike, but everybody that has a brain, everybody that's listening has a sense of this F.O.P.O. So although you're working with the best, everybody can work through some of this. I'd love to get into some of the tactical pieces, some of the drills. Awareness is step one. What are some of the things you're noticing to help overcome F.O.P.O? What does the drill work look like?
Well, it shows up in decision making. And F.O.P.O is really like this hidden filter for decision making. And it is informing how we think and how we speak and how we act, rather than our thoughts, words, and actions being aligned with our first principles. That if we're not careful, F.O.P.O is that filter that informs how the decisions that we make. And so it can lead people to make choices or actions that they believe will be more socially acceptable or less likely to be criticized by others, rather than the choices, that are aligned with their first principles. So what do we actually do there is we need to become aware of, one, like we talked about, that F.O.P.O is a thing, but then become more aware of how we are making our choices and making our decisions. And that, the best process I know there, and it feels like a little bit of a broken record because the science is so rich and it's been around for 2,600 years, but mindfulness is one of the best practices to increase awareness. And if you don't have a practice for mindfulness, or you're not deeply aware, you're not yet in the game of high performance. And I say that with empathy for people that are trying their very best, and they even might be the best in the world, But if you don't have a practice of being deeply aware, you're a grinder. You're just a hard worker. And if anything that the brain can teach us is that the efficiency of this 3-pound tissue that sits in our skull and this beautiful invisible world of psychology, efficiency is really important. And just grinding alone is certainly the slow route towards mastery of self or mastery of craft and a sense of freedom from the inside out. So awareness would be the first. Again, awareness is F.O.P.O holding me back. And then secondly, awareness of how your thoughts, your words, and your actions are being informed. And that's where mindfulness, again, plays dividends. So I can't imagine a place of starting without mindfulness, but there's 2 clicks underneath of that. There's 3 best practices for awareness. Mindfulness is certainly the big rock to get in the container, but that's not for everybody. I recognize that. Journaling would be a second opportunity. And so you're working out, how your thoughts work or insights that you have. So that would be the second. And then the third best option would be conversations with people of wisdom. So having a trained psychologist or somebody that is, for some, it's a coach or a life coach or an executive coach, they have a training to be able to listen deeply, to understand the frameworks, to not make recommendations or give advice, but to help become a mirror for one's own psychology so that the person can understand and metabolize what it feels like to be seen and heard and not be told what to do, because now we're falling back in that F.O.P.O trap. And amateur psychologists and amateur, coaches, they make recommendations and they give advice. And masterful psychologists and coaches, they listen more and they provide some context and reference points, but they don't tell people what to do. My experience is that everything that somebody needs is already inside them. And who am I? Who are we? And this is not for everybody. You guys might have an orthogonal approach here, but who am I to give advice? Who am I to tell somebody what is best for them? Who am I to suggest a course of action when I have never lived in their shoes and I don't understand their micro traumas and traumas? We do a disservice to people when we do that, make recommendations that give advice. However, we can hold space for people and hold up a mirror, and with kindness and an unconditional positive regard for that person and a curiosity about what it is that they're trying to sort out and how they're going about it, and times in their history that it's worked out and times in their history it hasn't worked out, and how both of those pay forward for what they're trying to unlock right now. It's one of the greatest instruments we have, is that relationship, that unbiased, highly attuned, positive regard for another person. It's a magical, seemingly magical gift to give to others. So those are the 3: mindfulness, journaling, and conversations with people of wisdom.
I think about parents of athletes a lot, and sometimes they're trying to do something well for their kid on the way home and make suggestions, and yet the kid is like, you weren't playing what I was playing. So what kind of advice do you give to a parent? Let's just say an athlete did not have a good game on the way home. What's the best protocol there to process that without being critical?
Okay, so one, the car ride home is why kids leave sport. That's a pretty well researched, but very intuitive statement. And so the car ride home, what I want to do on the car ride home is I want to wait for my son's signal about what he wants to talk about. And oftentimes they just came out of a highly stressful, very competitive, sometimes emotionally charged environment where they are performing and trying to get better in front of their peers and adults. And not all adult coaches are doing it well. So there could be eye rolling, criticism. So anyways, it's a highly charged experience that they just came through, like a 90-minute, 2-hour practice. So the car ride home, I want my relationship with my son to be a safe haven. I want it to be a bit of a sanctuary. And I'm not out there doing it. So I want to support him in the right way. And so the first thing that I'll do when he gets in the car is I'll say, how you doing? And that's not about like, how was practice? How you doing? And if he says, if his eyes are kind of welling up and he wants to like, and he says, I'm fine. It's like, okay, all right, there's a lot going on there for you. And then see where he goes. And so this is not a question that says, tell me about practice. What'd you learn? What'd you unlock? For the most part, sometimes I find myself doing that. But if I am going to ask questions about practice, I'm going to ask open-ended questions about their learning and their unlocking, and not about outcome, not about scores or depth chart or minutes on the court, or like, it's all about what is 100% under my son's control. So if you can follow some of those practices that I'm using and you find something in there that's useful, that would be cool. You know, but that's not how all people are built. Like some people, they understand the pressure for the kid to get better because it's now or never. And that anxiety can seep into the car ride home. And the last thing the kid needs is more pressure. So open-ended questions, if it is a gift to give to other people. I'm sorry, open-ended questions if it is about sport, open-ended questions if it's about life in general. But the life in general is just to palpate, like, where's this conversation going to go, and to make sure it's an open feel. And if you can change the channel, that works too. You know, like, how was school today?
That works for the very aware parent. What do you say to the kid who's got a parent who does the eye roll, who is hearing the you should have went left when you went right, and they don't want to go on that car ride home, but that's the only way for him to get home? How does a younger person deal with maybe an overcritical parent?
I mean, it's a great question. I'll tell you as a psychologist, there's two responses that tend to take place: anger or removal. So one of the most powerful things you can do in a relationship with another person is ignore them, to remove yourself from them. And when I say powerful, I'm saying that word not favorable or unfavorable, because it is a very hostile act to remove your attention, to remove your care, to remove your engagement with another person. And it can be a very healthy act. So I'm not putting qualities on it yet, but removing yourself from it, that's one option. And then fighting in anger is another option. So if your kid gets in the car, I'm speaking to parents first. If your kid gets in the car and they're pissed off, or they don't want to engage, as a parent, you have not created the right atmosphere. You do not have the right relationship intact for that person to trust and want to be part of a relationship that has to do with their growth. So now that's to the parents. And I know that that's a dull stick in the back, maybe even feels like a sharp stick. And I can hear people that like are saying, oh, you don't know my kids. I'm asking all the right questions. Like, my kid just da-da-da-da. This is the adult's job. Okay. Now, if I speak right to the kid and the parent comes in and it feels hot and heavy, and you don't want to remove yourself and put your headphones on and just kind of tune them out, because you want to have a relationship with them and you don't feel like fighting. Sometimes fighting in anger is actually a good tool. And the zeitgeist around anger is like, we shouldn't have any, but there's a reason biologically that we have that mechanism. And it's the fight for something. And that's a very philosophical thing that I'll pause for right now. Maybe we get into that later. So if the kid doesn't feel like fighting, or you don't feel like removing, then the statement to the adult is, hey, I'd like to have a conversation about things I'm in control of. Well, yeah, that's what we're doing. No, we're talking about outcome. We're talking about like how well I did relative to others. We're talking about if I was able to meet the goals that are like measurable. Mom, dad, uncle, whatever, like, I need to have conversations about things I can control. So if we're not going to do that, I'm probably not interested. So that would be a bit of a sophisticated approach for a kid to say that. I totally get it. The unsophisticated is to be like, Mom, like, can you just fucking leave me alone? You can bleep that out if you want. Or like, yeah, whatever, Mom, whatever, Dad. Yeah, whatever. So that's the unsophisticated. The sophisticated to the kid is like, your parents are trying. They don't know better. You might need to teach them. And the way to teach them is to say, I appreciate your concern. I appreciate your questions. I know that you've got some anxiety. I know you want the best for me, mom, dad, uncle. I know you want the best for me. I'm going to tell you that what I need to talk about are things I can control. So can you help me think through those? Now you got mom and dad and uncle or auntie or whatever. Now you got them in the crosshairs to help you grow.
Great. That's great advice. I want to go back to some of the F.O.P.O stuff. It's so interesting to me. You say that in your book, the feed of other people's opinion is one of the greatest threats in our world. And I think it's just so interesting, Mike, that we admire those who don't care what other people think about them, yet we have a hard time doing it ourselves. We love
Wait,
when
DJ, I want to hit that because I'm not suggesting that we don't think about other people's opinions. That's like that's what a narcissist does. That's what a sociopath does. That's what somebody with other emotional social disorders do. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying to stop worrying. That's the big word. It's not worrying about what other people are thinking. And it's not giving them the power of a sense of self. It's not offloading like what they think of me defines and determines who I am. It's this obsessive, latent, private, highly charged, anticipatory and checking, and then responding to what other people are thinking. So again, it's the excessive worry that is the problem. And I know I want to get back to your question, but let me open that up. There's 3 phases that I think are really important. It's that anticipation phase, which is like, what are they going to think? What should I wear? What should I say, not say? How do I show up? All of that anticipation shows up. That's basically code for some anxiety or anxiousness, but it's the anticipation of the likelihood of being accepted or the likelihood of being rejected from other people. And then a smaller bit of this F.O.P.O process is when we're actually together is checking, like this relentless checking though, scanning for external cues for acceptance or rejection. And then if we're unsettled, there's this very predictable way that we respond. We conform, we laugh at jokes, that are not that funny, maybe even offensive. Sometimes we conform, contort. Sometimes we'll confront, like, hey, what is that about? And really what we're trying to do there is to see if we're okay. And they go, whoa, back up, we're good. Oh, okay, yeah. Wow, sorry. Kind of lost my way. I was thinking this, sorry. Okay, so that confrontation is a way to get some engagement going so you're not left wondering in an anxious way. Sometimes we start to critique other people. Oddly enough, it's a way to bond with other people. So this is something that poisons hallways in teams and companies, is that critique. And then lastly, like I talked about, we like cut off, we disconnect from other people. And that's the way that typically, if you find that you confront or you conform or you contort your way or you're critiquing others or you're disconnecting yourself, that might be some indicators that you're responding to the fear of people's opinions. And so I'll pause there because obviously I think this concept is really important and I don't want to run over it. This is not thinking about other people. This is about not worrying about what they're thinking about you.
It's just golden advice. I heard on a podcast, kind of a breakthrough, at least for me, about the difference between being liked and likable, where you have some say and influence on being likable. If you ask someone, what do you think of when you hear someone who's likable? They care about others. They have a good sense of humor. They're generous, etc. You have some say on that, but you could still be very likable and not liked. How does that sit with you?
Liked, likable. Let me kind of grok that for a minute. Liked, likable. Yeah, I think that it's a good nuance. I think that both of them are speaking to that need for acceptance. And so at one level, it is primary and incredibly important to be liked and likable. Okay. That is primary to fit as part of the social fabric. However, if that is the prime dictum, if that's how you're organizing your thoughts, words, and actions, I think we've got a problem. Now, I would be more interested, and again, this is going back to being a psychologist, I'm more interested in exploring, does a person think that they're likable? Do they have a sense that they are appreciated by themselves? And so we are our best coach. We are with ourselves all day long. And if we're not sure if we matter, if we're likable or whatever, then we're going to offload that to other people. And that's where we get into a dangerous proposition. So I'm more interested in being about my first principles and being part of a community where they see that, they like that. They like those same first principles. Now we get a bit of a critical mass and to create the change, hopefully, that we want to see in the world, as opposed to like fitting in and feeling like you're part of it. That feels childish. It feels adolescent to me, as opposed to like somebody with wisdom. I don't think that they would say, say otherwise.
Mike, where does self-talk play a role in this? I gotta imagine it's in there somewhere with F.O.P.O. What are your thoughts on self-talk, and how does it relate to fear of other people's opinions, and what does that look like?
Okay, so our self-talk is it's one of the core psychological components, the narrative that we have with ourselves. So the monologue that we have with ourselves is really, in essence, our psychology. And I'll say a bold statement here is that all the real work is invisible. All the important work is invisible. So our self-talk, our psychology is completely invisible. So the investing in awareness of how you speak to yourself, how you want to speak to yourself, and that alignment between the way you speak to yourself and your first principles, that kind of triangulation is really important. I don't know another way through it. Like, I think we all think psychology has had a bad rap, right? It's the study of dysfunction and disorder and disease and da-da-da-da. This is why I was so attracted to the psychology of excellence, the psychology of sport and performance. It's the study of the process that helps people be their very best. And that's what I think you and I are talking about now, is that when you're lined up and you know how to speak to yourself, to back yourself, how to not be a quote unquote expert, but to be somebody who's on the path of learning at the most rapid, aggressive, enjoyable rate possible. And you're doing it in a way that you're honoring what you know and what you don't know. Now you're on it. Okay, now you're completely on it. And so awareness is a big part of it. The second piece is, I think psychology is not the study of disorder or excellence, but psychology is the study of self. Like, if you want to experience our physical time that we have together in a meaningful way, or an impactful way, or a loving way, fill in the adjective here, you've got to know yourself. You've got to study yourself, your tendencies. What are your tripwires? What are your invisible cues? And what are your observable cues that lead you onto a particular train of thought? And so, like, you have to know yourself to have just a chance of having the good life. And so the study of self, a la one's own understanding one's psychology, is met at your biological response to stress and your psychological response to stress. The psychological response is how you speak to yourself. So the three of us can have a conversation in a living room and be totally cool, and like our self-talk is great, and maybe we just had a massage or we went for a long walk, and it's like we're about to have a nice meal together, like, and it's all chill and good. But you don't really meet yourself until like a gorilla knocks on the door, until a saber tooth is kind of amongst us, or somebody's wielding a knife, or they're posturing in a way with their eyebrows are frowned, their head is slightly tilted down, their hands and shoulders are kind of raised up, and their voice is loud. That's when you meet yourself. So if you want to meet yourself in those moments, you have to, just like we do with athletes, we front load our psychological skills training. We prepare psychological skills in low stress, calm environments to see if we can be about it in higher stress environments. So the way you speak to yourself is part of your training. Now, ignorance is bliss, that phrase, I couldn't disagree more, right? Like it's a really hard way to go through life. I think it's harder, exponentially harder to go through life with high intelligence or moderate intelligence and low awareness, because we end up we know better. We know that it doesn't need to be this way, but we just keep finding ourselves back at, a place or that doesn't feel right to us. We're whipped around literally by the conditions of the world. The most powerful people on the planet, they never let, big word, the most powerful people on the planet never let their external conditions dictate their internal experience.
Is that what keeps a professional athlete in the game? You're obviously very familiar with the Seahawks, but let's just say they had a terrible first half. I mean, they might have won the last 5 games, but they get booed off. What happens at halftime? Is that just not affect them, or are they going through some mental drills to just not let that get to them? Interested to hear how they bounce back.
I'll speak about the Seahawks in particular, is that I was with the team for 9 seasons, and historically we were slow starters. And we had a stat that we were a very difficult team to beat. So our margin of loss was the highest statistical ranking for scores within 3 points. So we lost less than 3 points on better than anybody else in the league, meaning we're hard to beat. Very small. Very rarely do we get blown out. Very rarely do we see that kind of average margin of like being beat by 8 points. Like we're within 2 points of being beat when we do lose. And we were a playoff running team, got the 2 Super Bowls, won 1, lost 1 in dramatic fashion.
Yes.
And so, the question here is about what did we do? Well, we grounded ourselves in being great competitors. And so the culture that Coach Carroll set was built on the concept of always compete. What does that mean when you double click? It means always compete to be your very best, not to be the best, not to be better than your competitor or your teammate. And we understand you're trying to make a depth chart. We understand that you're trying to get starting time. Our culture is built to always compete to be your very best. And that means to have great thoughts. That means to have great awareness of your emotions. That means to have the skills to manage yourself in high stress, high heat moments, which are basically emotional challenges, and to have incredible technical skills. So you've got great psychology, great physical, great technical, deep command of your emotions, so that you can work on being your very best. So we come in, we start a little slow. We never really unlocked why that was, by the way. We ran hundreds of experiments to try to sort that out. And it was something that was a blind spot to me, at least, of why we started slow. Nonetheless, halftime would happen. And if we're up, it was almost a sure bet we were going to win. If we're down, don't pull your money off the table, because we are always competing to be our very best. And it was a moment to in the locker room. I mean, so pregame, an athlete would do the pregame speech. And most people are really ready pregame. We'd have a whole set of best practices for people to be at their optimal state of functioning. So psychological, emotional, breathing regulation, all set of practices for people to be at their 5. That's the sweet spot that we talk about it. If you think about it, what's it called? Ipsative relationship or a bell-shaped curve is that a 5 is kind of in that sweet spot between activation and high performance. So that pre-talk by an athlete was more like, it was cool. It was a vibe. It was fun. Sometimes, I don't know, 50% of the time the athletes were terrible. Like they're trying to figure it out too. It's not scripted. It's just a good moment, and then, but halftime, that was Coach Carroll's moment. So Coach Carroll would send a message to the team, and it was pretty well scripted. It was always emotional. It was always honest and heartfelt. And it's pretty well scripted that it was going to be about, what are we going to do now? We got a second half, start over, one play at a time, one breath at a time, one thought at a time. Let's go out there and be our badass self. Let's go out there and bring all of it. And we had the style that we were cultivating at the Seahawks, which you could call this your cultural attributes, but it was great enthusiasm. So let's go out there and play fun, play free. It was great effort. Let's go be, absolutely bring everything you've got, every inch. Okay. And these are not things that we just bring up on game day.
Yeah.
We bring up these attributes on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay. Great enthusiasm, great effort, great toughness. It's a moment here to talk about like what toughness looks like. Remind them that they're already tough. Not that they got to go find toughness. They're already tough. And then let's play smart. Be aware. Make the right decisions. Let's go have some fun. So we just point back to who we are because we've been investing in those 4 attributes uncommonly so. Where businesses make mistakes is that they do their value stuff like, okay, we've got our 7 pillars or our 4 pillars, or our 3 pillars of values, whatever it is. And then they put those words on the walls and they never train the psychological skills to be about those values. So they're just good words on walls. The modern day businesses are doing deep thinking about what those values are and then double clicking. This is the work we're doing with Microsoft. They're double clicking to say, what are the psychological skills we need to be about that virtue or value? Because if we've got these 3 or 7 values in place, our product, our strategy is going to come alive because these values and virtues are in essence the building blocks for our culture. And we've all heard the phrase culture eats strategy for lunch. It's actually culture is the foundation to express great strategy. So the best attempt to have a culture is to do the intellectual work and say, what are the values that we want to stand for? What is the essence of our culture? But if you don't have the psychological skills to be about it, then it's like, it's a hope. It's a bit of a wish that people can operate well in those high heat moments that are coming. They are definitely coming.
Is part of that foundation, Mike, to athletes of all calibers to watch how much time you put into looking at social media, because there's all kinds of pundits out there just taking verbal shots at you. Do you recommend that? I mean, to the professional athletes, say you have a poor game, hypothetically, just stay off of it because it's not going to help you. What happens on that social media side of it?
I mean, if you talk to just about anyone that understands kind of how psychology works, social media is noise. Now, if you use it as a tool and it's a one-way, it's more directional, that it's a platform and a tool for you to share you and to share your ideas, and you're not waiting for that loop to come back about what do they think. So for example, say there's a highlight reel you put up or they put up, or there's a thought that you share with your community, send it and just write it and send it, or upload it and then be done with it and not check for what do they think of me, because that is the on-ramp for F.O.P.O. So that now if you're going to get on the on-ramp of F.O.P.O, you've got to have best practices to have an off-ramp. And so the off-ramp are all the psychological skills that we talk about, like breathing work and self-talk work and fill in the blanks. So that's an on-ramp to F.O.P.O. And if you use it directionally as a tool for you, it's a win. It's great. You can build your community and help bring them along on the insights that are important to you and celebrate your mistakes and celebrate your failures, no problems. But if you're like checking to see what are they thinking about me, what are they saying about me, you're in the crosshairs, squarely in the crosshairs of F.O.P.O.
I would love to go back to the time you spent with Seattle Seahawks. I'm newly a team consultant working with just some high school teams around the area, Mike. And I would just be curious if you had one piece of advice or one thing that you took to the organization that was profound during your time there that, maybe just to scratch my own itch that you would recommend me do with the team. Was there something that you thought, and again, every team is very different. I'm sure for professional and high school is very, very different, but was there something that you're like, man, we did this and it was just really profound, the impact that this had on the organization?
I mean, it feels funny to say my profound work was, but I'll tell you something that I really enjoy doing.
Sure.
Is, and I think it goes a long way, is working from a first principle that everything that you need is already inside you. So if I hold that posture and position and curiosity, and that it's already in you, you've already figured out how to do things really well in your life. And the challenge that you're facing right now is X, let's say, well, where earlier in the alphabet have you figured that out? And then people go, oh yeah, you're right. Oh, gee, I didn't even say anything. I just asked, how have you figured this out before? Like I did this and that, but I can't do that in this one. Oh, okay. So that the challenge is not X, it's X plus 2. Oh, okay. So how do you think that, how are you trying to sort it out? And they go, well, I think that this is the best play. Okay, do you want to run that experiment? So it's like, it's just being curious. And I think a mistake that happens with consultants, like what you're bringing up, is like, okay, you're the smart one coming in with some answers, and actually, what you're providing is some unbiased observation. And if that unbiased observation, hopefully it's unbiased, that unbiased observation, it comes from a posture that they already understand a path to success, and your job is to help unlock that. I think you're onto something cool. Like that's what I love doing.
Yeah, that's so cool. This has been an awesome, like a master class in FOPO. As we close down, we got a few minutes left. Mike, is there anything that we missed or we didn't cover when it comes to FOPO that you think needs to be drilled in before we part ways here?
Yeah, so Bob Bowman. As you ask that question, Bob Bowman comes to mind. Bob Bowman is Michael Phelps' coach, and he was on the Finding Mastery podcast, and we're talking about some of the best practices that Michael Phelps did. Of course, Michael Phelps, one of the best ever in the world at what he did. And in this conversation, we haven't talked about the power of mental imagery. And it's a tool that is used regularly by world's best. And it's often kind of dismissed in some respect and not encouraged enough to be formalized and structured with an athlete or non-athletes, even executives or parents. So one of the things that I was doing for a long time, and I had pushback from the pop psychology world, and many coaches are pop psychology folks. So what I would do, and so I had to work below the surface, if you will, and not tell coaches how I was doing this unless they valued science. So the science is very clear on imagery, how it helps with neurological patterning, how it helps with familiarity of future environments, how it helps with self-confidence, Okay. Now, what I was doing is I was doing an 85-15. 85% of the time that we're doing imagery is to spend on seeing and feeling success, exactly how you would like to solve something in the future. Okay. 15% of the time, putting yourself in a compromised setting or situation and figuring out how to work in that setting or to unlock something from that experience. And so I was below the surface. I wouldn't tell people that I was, because I'm sorry, let me finish my thought. The pop psychology approach is like, if you see it, it'll happen. Like, like you just have to see it and it'll take place. That's not how this works. It's not, like, please. That's not how this works. So talking to Bob Bowman on the Finding Mastery podcast, he's talking about his and Michael Phelps performance imagery protocol, and it was an 85-15 as well. So he's talking about Michael Phelps was doing imagery, seeing his bathing suit rip off, his swimsuit rip off, I should say, or seeing his goggles flip open with water gushing in. And sure enough, on one of his epic finishes, as you guys know, 3-4 strokes before he touches out, his goggles flip, water's flooding in, can't see. That overwhelming thing could cause a fraction of a second of hesitation, but he was familiar with it. There was already a programming for it. So he just was like, cool, kept stroking, out touches by tenths of a second, next gold medal up. So I bring that up because mental imagery for any walk of life can be a very potent tool. And I want to encourage people to not be afraid, but to embrace seeing themselves in compromised or challenging situations and work from there to experience an unlock that's free. It's a free look at the future. And so mental imagery is a radical tool. I'm all about it right now. And hopefully that can be fun for people to explore.
That's awesome, Mike. Hey, thanks for your time. So this has been a lot of fun, a lot of great takeaways. The book comes out today. How can my listeners support you? Where can they get the book? Just the floor is yours to close us down.
Thank you. So findingmastery.com/book is one way to do it. You can get it in all the regular places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can get it at your local bookstore as well. But if you want to go online to our website, findingmastery.com/book. The reason I suggest our website is because we've got a whole bundle of really cool things that we offer, no cost, just to be part of our community. One of those that I'll recommend now is a morning mindset routine. And so it's 4 things to do in the morning to wake up, to switch on parts of your brain that we think are important for living the good life. And so if you want to send us an email, or you can go online to our website, you can find it. It's our morning mindset routine.
Cool. Mike, this was an honor and a privilege. Thanks again.
I appreciate you.